Okay for that, no matter.
Hey everybody, we're only a few minutes late, so there will be none of that complaining, except if you can't hear us. I've been talking to Rachel for a year, and we've been trying to set up this this chat because she wrote and sent me a very interesting book that about Lyme disease and Dr. Mengele, and I started learning something, and that happens often. And there's a story here that I wanted to share with you guys, and I really think you should, well, besides read the book, take a look at this, because one of the things about Lyme disease that I did not know was that this is only discovered in officially in 1976. So this is a relatively new disease, and it may have its origins back in World War II research. But wonderful for all of you, I'm not going to be the one that's going to be talking today, so you won't have to listen to me, which makes your Sunday so much better. You are going to have to listen to Rachel. How did all this happen? How did you find an interest in what most people would call an unobscure disease? An obscure disease, I was saying.
Well, it used to be obscure. When the first case apparently came along in 1969, but they couldn't figure out what was the cause of it until they discovered it was a parasite, a blood parasite caused by a tick that occurred in several children that were in Old Lyme, Connecticut. So they named it after Old Lyme, Connecticut. And it was pretty much sort of slowly recognized by, well, the two main researchers were a tick specialist, Willie Bergdorfer, in the Rocky Mountain Laboratory in Colorado, and a co-worker that was named Dr. Alan Steer from Yale University. And this mother brought her two children, to this Dr. Alan Steer and said, "What's the matter with them?" And they eventually were diagnosed with Lyme disease, the spirochete bacteria, a spiral-shaped parasite, which is a cousin to syphilis. All right, and it's sexually transmissible. There are 300,000 new cases a year now diagnosed or reported of Lyme disease. It's spreading faster than AIDS and cancer and everything else you can imagine. So it's time to talk about it. Books have been written about it. Well, I was diagnosed in 1987. And
you actually have Lyme disease.
Oh, yeah. Oh, awful. And it's just, it eats your brain. It eats your spinal cord. It ruins your B12. It eats up B12. It eats your lunch. It's really nasty stuff. So now syphilis is a little bit bigger spirochete, and it eats your flesh and bones. Okay, so there's a difference in how much they eat. That's all. But once it gets in your brain, it's very hard to get rid of it because antibiotics don't penetrate the brain sheath. And I was miserable since childhood, and nobody knew what was the matter. I took a series of vaccines for a passport in 1968. It threw me into a tizzy. I mean, I had what I called convulsions, but one of my allergists said, "Oh no, it's rigors from the tetanus booster shot you got with your vaccines." So he was the first guy to really nail it. But this Dr. Paul Lavoie was a Lyme specialist on the West Coast. And the first thing he said to me, "Where are you from? Are you from Connecticut, maybe?" I said, "Well, yes. How'd you know?" So, and he was a specialist, an arthritis, a lupus specialist. And my twin sister, who I find out is not my twin, we're not even related, but nevertheless, my twin sister was diagnosed with lupus. Mary Nevins, Sue Wallace across the street were diagnosed with lupus and dead. My sister still survives. And there were 11 dead next door neighbors. My mother kept calling me up, you know. Hey, Rach, guess what? Guess who's dead now? You know, I'm like, oh my God, finally I made a map. And I said, what on earth is going on?
And I'm taking it that this is this map that with it that come on. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Now that's of Lyme spread early records in the 70s show 4 major port sites. These are Lend-Lease port sites. There's New York, which really goes from Boston down to Philadelphia. And that's where 80% of all the cases are.
So Lyme disease was found and discovered in America.
Yes. And the next big space was up in Duluth on the Great Lakes, another Lend-Lease port, you know, for grain, okay? And we go down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. That's another spot. And the 4th port is San Francisco, okay? And again, a Lend-Lease port, okay? The Kaiser shipyards and things like that. And I thought, wow, everybody was going, yap, yap, yap. It's the birds. It's the deer tick. Well, they don't spread the disease. They stop the disease. The immune system, I mean, the deer eat the tannin in the pine tree tips. And it's used for tanning leather. And that penetrates the brain sheath and kills the spirochetes. So then you have immunized deer, you have immunized birds, and they're not the vector. They actually then immunize the sick, blood-sucking ticks, okay?
Yes, because the animals don't get sick from this.
Well, some of them do. Domesticated animals do. And what was our first domesticated animal?
Dogs and cats. Dogs.
No. Rats. Garbage. Okay? Rats.
back to the plague carriers.
Yes, you got it, you know. And they pass it on to their offspring. And the field mice, you know, the cute little ones with little pink ears and everything, they are the vectors. And what carries rats? Ships. So I thought, oh man, I'm looking in the wrong place. Everybody's yelling Plum Island. It's right off the coast of Connecticut. It's the USDA, the Department of Agriculture's animal disease test site. It has to be Plum Island.
Plum Island was the site of a lot of dark things and tests.
No. I wrote to Dr. Roger Breeze, who was directing Plum Island, and he said there were never, ever any spirochete bacteria experiments on Plum Island, period. And all of these conspiracy theories are just that. They're nonsense. Alan Steer, let's go back to him. Mm-hmm. He did surveys of sick ticks and sick people in Connecticut, okay? And 12 times the number of sick ticks are on the east side of the Connecticut River. 30 times of the sick Lyme disease people that are, you know, infected, 30 times are on the east side of the Connecticut River, which cuts the state of Connecticut right in half, right down the middle. What's on the east side of the Connecticut River? Textile mills, you know, for cotton, for wool, and herring plants, you know, deherring plants, all this sort of stuff. Because that's where all the big streams go into the, you know, come down from the mountains, the hills, and ponds, and make paddle wheel textile mills operate since, the Civil War and cotton pickers, okay? It all went up to Connecticut. The west side of the Connecticut River is more flat until you get way up into the, like where the Catskills are in the Berkshire Mountains and things like that. But there's a void between the western half of Connecticut until you hit the Hudson River, and the Hudson River over to New York City and everything is a basket case. You don't have deer running through the city, herds of deer. You have herds of rats running through the city. Okay? And then you have furs. So I went to the Maritime Records, in the National Archives, and I looked up, shipping. And it was all coming out of Russia with these fleet of liberty ships that we gave to Stalin to fight Hitler. 125. They gave us back 8. They loaded them up with furs. We're talking about millions of dead animals. 426 tons on the SS Elbrus. Okay?
Yes.
Aptly named, because, the SS Germans the doctors are involved in this from Auschwitz.
Okay. All right. I think we should probably start from go back in time and then work our way forwards to the time of how far back did this happen and who was involved, and then work our way up till today, or to ground zero.
The SS Elbrus was the first, I call it, of a fleet of Flying Dutchmen, ships. They're death ships. The SS Elbrus was a T-type 2 oil tanker that was supposed to dock in New York, but there was a longshoreman strike. So they went to Philadelphia, unloaded their cargo of 426 tons of furs, raw fur skins. Okay, and we're talking like, maybe 500,000 dead animals right there on that one ship. And they were followed by more. I mean, the SS Suchen, the SS Emba, the SS Vilnius. Oh, I can't name them all, but they came, each one with about 500 more tons apiece of raw fur skins. And so they went, but the SS Elbrus was the first on January 6, 1946. It docked in Philadelphia, loaded up the furs on tugs, and sent them over to Amtorg Trading Company in New York City. Now, Amtorg it was built by Lenin and Julius and Armand Hammer just after World War I in 1925. Okay, and we had the Congress had put up an embargo on all Russian or Bolshevik trade. We didn't trade with them, but we didn't recognize the Bolsheviks until FDR was president. Okay, so we put up an embargo. So how did Lenin circumvent this? Well, he created a loop of Russian trading companies. The first one was Westtorg in Germany. The next one was Arcos in London. And the third one was Amtorg in New York City. And then it had branches all over the country, okay? And they mainly shipped in furs, and we shipped out gold from Fort Knox. Enough gold to nearly sink those Liberty ships, okay? And that gold had been leaving since 1925. The furs were infested. The president of Amtorg, it was supposed to be an American corporation, but the president of Amtorg was Isaiah Horrigan. And he was murdered. He ordered in ergot, which is a wheat rust mold, which is the basis of LSD, okay? But it's a very strong antibiotic, much stronger than penicillin. And he ordered that for the fur warehouses, okay? Well, this was, a catastrophe, for Russia, for Lenin. So he was murdered. He was wrapped in chains and thrown into the bottom of Lake George in upstate New York, where Antorg had a children's camp, okay, on the east side of this 33-mile long, beautiful lake up in the Adirondacks. And on the west side was Millionaire's Row, okay? We had a cottage just a little north of Millionaire's Row, okay? That's where our family was. So it turns out, anyways, that I presume his son, Dr. Horrigan, took amnesty, in East Hartford. He was an allergist on what's now Connecticut Boulevard, next to the Bulkley Bridge. And he was our doctor as children, okay? So, and Antorg Trading Company moved from, I guess it was Fifth Avenue, to the Pratt Mansion in Manhattan, okay? This is going up towards the Hamptons, all right? Huge, beautiful place owned by, I think it's Howard Pratt, and his brother, Francis Pratt, built Pratt Whitney aircraft in East Hartford. So you can see there's sort of an avenue of convenience here for espionage, which was Antorg's main mission, to industrial espionage in the United States, with triangles of, this is during World War II now, from World War I to World War II. This is with what the FBI describes as triangles of power that were created between corporate CEOs, labor union leaders, and the American Communist Party. So, and because during World War II, Russia was our ally, these people apparently that sold secrets to Antorg, paid their way through college maybe, who knows, and worked for the Defense Department and things like that. They were pardoned by Truman at the end of the war, as well as the mafia that was guarding the waterfront, with Allen Dulles. He hired the mafia. So the mafia was also pardoned. And so nobody gets prosecuted for anything, okay? So that's sort of the basis of Antorg.
Well, I think we need to go further back and see how you're saying that Lyme disease was a disease that was man-made, created back during the time of the war before, and how?
Well, it wasn't really man-made. It's been here for thousands of years. There's even records of Lyme 200 years ago up in the Great Lakes that my doctor, Paul Lavoie, uncovered. But it wasn't rampant because the rats weren't rampant, okay? I mean, an occasional deer would get it, and an occasional fur trapper would get it. But, and they could live through it and get over it, too. So that's, Lyme has been here, I think, easily since the fur shipping came in from Russia, okay? And the air was brought in.
It was in Europe, it wasn't here.
Right. And Russia was overwhelmed with it. 23 million cases of typhus in Russia during World War II and the Bolshevik Revolution.
Yeah.
And followed by 23 million cases of rat-carrying relapsing fever, which is the old name for Lyme disease. Okay? It's the same thing. Except the relapsing fever can be carried by the ticks, the hard shell ticks, the Ixodes ticks, the soft shell ticks, and other arachnids, and also lice. Okay? So it's really nasty stuff, and it's been around for a long, long time. But Russia was inundated, and the Red Cross went in with many volunteers during the Bolshevik Revolution to put down this epidemic. Well, some people speculate that the epidemic was deliberately created to subjugate the Russian citizens to the Bolshevik revolution, which is very possible. I mean, Malcolm C. Grau published a book called Surgeon Grau in the Russian Fighting. And it was all about his volunteer service to the Red Cross during the Bolshevik Revolution. And he became Surgeon General of the U.S. Air Force afterwards.
Really?
Okay, so he's a prominent guy, and his book, of course, isn't very popular, but you can read it. It's horrific. It really is. So, and these epidemics were turned on and off like a spigot. People became very suspicious.
That's actually very interesting because disease have always been a big part of military chemical weapons research. And I'm not going to draw any parallels till today, but you've always seen military entities across the globe researching in epidemics and in diseases, bringing back old diseases that were no more in order to defeat, to inflict them on their enemy. Or as we saw even in San Francisco, we've even done these tests on both various diseases and things on our own. So this is not unusual at all. How did Lyme disease then officially fit into the programs?
Well, if you're suffering malnutrition and famine already, relapsing fever is deadly. Okay,
Yeah.
That's the old name for Lyme disease. And millions and millions of people were starved out, particularly by Stalin in his pogroms.
Yes.
You're looking at the Ukraine, you're looking at Kazakhstan. I mean, they were nearly wiped out. And the coup de grace was relapsing fever. So it was terrible and it was cruel, but we covered it up. And in fact, by the time Eisenhower, was the Allied forces commander, he put out a total ban on any discussion of pandemics because the Russians were suffering it 10 times more than we were. And so they were killing themselves, really. And so, I mean, why go to war, when they're doing the job for us? He backed down out of the Czechoslovakian revolt and the Hungarian revolt, and he just sat back and played golf and just watched Russia deteriorate from the inside out. I mean, it's better them die than our soldiers, I guess, but it was horribly cruel, horribly cruel.
So how? Go on. I was going to. So how does the potential of Mengele fit in this?
Okay. Well, the Russians, peasants, slaughtered everything that was on 4 feet. Okay, their livestock, their cattle, their horses, and all the wildlife, and they shipped it all to Vladivostok. Okay, to be.
Well, they had to eat.
Yes. Well, in the meantime, the Waffen Pruf 9 of Germany's army, had been inside of Russia at the Tomka proving grounds on the Volga River since 1926 through 1933.
Yes.
And Hitler becomes, the leader, and after the Reichstag fire and all that nonsense. So he pulls us out, he pulls the German Waffen Pruf 9 under Walter Hirsch out of Russia. And Stalin kills off everybody that's witness to this. But then he sends them back in to Russia on decontamination missions.
Before the war, or?
Yes. Well, in 1940,
Okay, so,
And
that's before the war against Russia. Or
right, that's before Barbarossa, but it's after the Ribbentrop
yeah,
Molotov
after Poland is over.
Aggression Act, right, 1939, and they've split up Poland. Okay, and the Russians want to get rid of the Polish military and their intelligentsia. And hence we have the Katyn Force massacre. So how did all these people die in this massacre? You know, they plant little baby trees on top of it afterwards. You know, people were asking this at the end of World War II in Congress if Eisenhower knew about this Katyn Force massacre. The Russians were fingering the Germans, and the Germans were fingering the Russians. Well, it was joint. That was the problem. And the decontamination mission under Walter Hirsch's Waffen Proof 9 included very peculiar suspects. Okay.
All right.
Josef Mengele was brought with them to be put into the gas and smoke unit. Walter Schreiber, who was head of the biological warfare unit with the Waffen Proof 9, later the head of the German Stasi in East Germany, but he was brought along. Toxicologist Wolfgang Wirth was brought along.
Really?
And Professor Kluwe was brought along. Okay, now what was his expertise? He was proficient in the dispersion of rats. Okay, and he had taught the Russians how to make these tiny little parachute with cages on the bottom of them, holding one rat each, a sick rat. And they would be dropped over these hordes of rats that were running across the tundra and across the steppes, you know, Central Asia. I mean, as far as you could see to the horizon, armies of rats. And they would infect them, you know, with these little parachuted sick rats, okay? And these cages were designed by Kluwe. Okay, so he was there with the decontamination missions.
So the indication is really that between the wars in the 30s, when the Germans were testing and playing with tank forces and things in Russia, they had permission to work in Russia on some of the things that the Treaty of Versailles denied them to do in Germany. They went to Russia and do the training. Some of this was chemical weapons and biological that they then went in to clean up before Barbarossa.
Yes.
With a very interesting team of people. That's actually very interesting.
The whole history of IG Farben, starting out as a textile dye company in Moscow, evolved into making pesticides that would kill the vermin, the arachnids, in the wool. Well, they cooked up Tabin. That was the first pesticide, and it made Gerhard Schrader, their doctor, you know, scientist, chemist, go home every night, and he was becoming blind at night. So eventually, the Waffen Proof 9 seized the Tabin. They used it first as a softener for Buna, and then as a poison gas. And it had too many precipitates when they tried to force all these chemicals together. So it was very inefficient. And to the rescue came General Red Army, General Vladimir Ipachev, who built a high combustion gas chamber that ended the problem with these, you know, loss of these precipitates, and it forced all these chemicals together. So he just gave it to IG Farben and the Waffen Proof 9. And in return, because if you joined German industry and bought stocks, he got access to all of I.G. Farben's patents, including Tabin, okay? And
Really?
Sergei Lebedev was ordered by Stalin to make 7 Buddha rubber factories. Well, they only made 2 because they didn't have any money for more. But
Oh, when
so
you talk about Buna and IB Farben, there's such an interesting. Oh, so many interesting things these people made.
well, they were called the Octopus. They had 800 international subsidiaries that were purchasing German stocks, and IG Farben wasn't alone. But they were pouring money into the bankrupt Germany.
Yeah.
And that's where Hitler got his money. So
Yes.
he had to depend upon German capitalist industry to
Yes.
support his socialist, Third Reich. And that was, I mean, he was cooking his own goose. All those industries, they leaked like sieves. Okay, Morton. Let's see, Damon Morton was Churchill's specialist in industrial espionage. Okay, since the 1930s, the wilderness years. Okay, biography, and so that's one source. Pope Pius's noblemen, the black nobles, were the industrialists in Europe. And they're part of the Black Orchestra that also spied on not only Stalin, but on Hitler. So, and then you had the biggest intelligence operation in the United States was under the Naval Technical Mission to Europe, which was James Forrestal, Secretary of Navy, and then Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal. So, I mean, there was plenty of places to, to communicate with, okay? And so these are the files that I became interested in, all right, to approach. And there's this huge underground city in Suitland, Maryland, that's 20 acres with underground railroad cars with World War II records that have not been declassified, most of them, because Allen Dulles destroyed the index to them. But I wrote the Pentagon, and I got some purport cards and got into it. Anyways, boy, I was pushing my luck. The CIA was furious that the Pentagon was helping me. Okay.
Yes, there's more people who don't like each other these days.
Yes, yeah. So my life has become rather difficult, but I'm a very persistent person. The more they bully me, I bully them back. I just dig in. I'm obstinate, I guess, and I'm obsessed. So, I mean, I don't see a communist under every bed, but I see one under every other bed.
So Mengele, he worked for IG Farben, which is interesting.
Yes, he worked for the Waffen Pruf 9, which had hired IG Farben. Okay, so in a sense, he did, and he his knowledge. He was such a cool person, but his. All in the defense of Germany. Bullshit. I'm sorry. You come to the point where you realize these people are driven by greed.
Well, yes.
But anyway, who would have ever thought? He had joined the SS so that he would climb up the ladder of success and was sent to Auschwitz, where he ran the selection of who lives, who dies when they, disembark the trains. He was responsible for sending millions of people into the furnaces. I mean, it was horrible. And he pulled out the ones that he thought were still capable of working. And then he wanted the lab rat twins that he could use at Auschwitz for his laboratories for inventing vaccines against relapsing fever, which the spirochetes, coupled with other diseases like typhus or brucellosis, I mean, they had were created multiple sclerosis. So he experimented on the twins there, trying to, see what was causing the multiple sclerosis, and they infected these children. And so many died. I mean, thousands of these children died. It's so cruel. And the survivors wrote about it. Well, but they were so young and traumatized, they couldn't recognize Mengele. And you can't blame them. I mean, half starved to death, used as lab rats and sick and everything. How could they know? And I also corresponded with, a chemist that had been at Auschwitz. And he was well into his 90s, back 20 years ago when I was corresponding with him. And he was potsy. I don't know how else to tell you. I mean, you could understand, but he swore he saw Josef Mengele come into the United States in a marimba band. And I said, "Oh, thank you for telling me so much. What a darling you are. And, God bless you and goodbye." I mean, he was like, duh. I mean, so there were no witnesses that could come forward. Well, then,
or would.
Well, you couldn't blame these people because the problem is that Josef Mengele's family, which was a very tight-knit family, protected each other. And he had Alois, his youngest brother, and then a very close sibling named Karl Jr., who was almost his twin, a look-alike.
True.
And according to Gerald Posner, Karl Mengele Jr. was a decoy to let his brother escape. And this is where it gets tricky. He vanished in the East, according to Posner, for some time. Well, the poison gas specialist of IG Farben at Dierenfurth, the whole factory was captured by the Russians, and it was taken back lock, stock, and barrel with the scientists back to Beketovka, where they had a factory there that was even 10 times bigger, making more gases and biological warfare. I got this out of the OACSI files, and I went, aha, I'm going to get one of these dragon returnees that got ratlined back out, and I'll ask him to talk. Talk about C as in stupid. I mean, God, I just... So I got hold of Dr. Henry Tolkmith's chemical warfare files at Dierenfurth, and he got transferred apparently to Beketovka with his partner. That was 8 miles south of Stalingrad. With
this is Tolkien.
That's the real Mengele, okay, on the forged ID card of Tolkmith. We don't have a real picture of Tolkmith, but this is the forged ID card that Mengele got hold of somehow.
So this is interesting.
Yes, and that's he has a side view and a front view, and Tolkmith, the real Tolkmith, makes it to Beketovka with von Bach, and he's still in there in, I think, October 1948, while the Tolkmith files that I had declassified, 366 pages of them, said he was in the United States in April 1948. So how could he be in the United States in April 1948 and simultaneously in Beketovka inside of Russia in October 1948? Okay, that raised the question. And he was escorted. He was supposed to go work with the Dow Chemical Company, Willard Henry Dow, who saved us during World War II with his desalinization of seawater to get magnesium for the aircraft industry. And he was making 10 times more than I.G. Farben was. I.G. Farben was Willard Henry Dow's nemesis. Oh, man.
Yeah, they would have been. Yeah.
Competitors for years. And he hated them. He actually got the Congress to throw up tariffs against I.G. Farben and get them out of the United States. So, I mean, he's an American hero. Well, anyways, so it's very hard to imagine that he would hire an I.G. Farben war criminal. And the thing is, Henry Tolkman, because he was a mild-mannered chemist, a poison gas specialist from Dyrenfurth, who was not even a Nazi. His wife was half Jewish. He couldn't be promoted. He couldn't get professorships or anything in Germany. It's natural for him to go join Bernard von Bach, his partner, from Dyrenfurth, over to Beketovka. Well, this monstrous factory over there was a shambles. And it had all kinds of explosions. People, the workers were dying. And every time a new railroad car shipment of atropine roots came in, they ran right down and grabbed them right off the freight cars and ate them. And they were foaming at the mouth and trying to survive. It was a nightmare. So lots of people died at Dyrenfurth. And I began to think, well, maybe the real Tolkman died at Dyrenfurth. And he gave his wife Valentine to Mengele, also a poison gas expert and a biological warfare expert. And said, get my wife out of here. Beat it back to, West Germany. Get Ratlined out. That's what I think happened. But I can't prove it. But I cannot imagine Willard Henry Dow approving of a real war criminal on his payroll.
Well, I'll give you three things to sort of support that a bit. Where one of them is, it was not unusual for SS and Nazi Party members to marry Jewish women or take up Jewish names after the war to hide. That was not unusual at all. And another thing is, as the war came to an end, Mengele was not really a known entity. It took quite a few years before everybody started going through paperwork and figured out what he was and who and what and where. He had several years where he could disappear. He wasn't known as a war criminal for a long time. So there's plenty of time for him to have gone paperclip. Because he was a member of the SS, he would have had to come under a program or a paperclip program or something in order to come to the States and work one way or another. There's plenty of time for him to have disappeared before he ended up in South America with so many others like Barbie. And also the Mengele papers, the research papers, they were saved as Auschwitz and brought to the West, were they not?
Oh, yes. Well, first they went to the East and then they came to the West. Everybody wanted Mengele's human experiments, both in poison gas and, remember, he was in the decontamination missions. Mm-hmm. Okay, and they wanted his experiments on the twins at Auschwitz for vaccines. So he was highly coveted, both East and West. But as the Nuremberg trials approached, these Nazi war criminals inside of Russia were hot potatoes. And they started getting executed before they never even made it to Nuremberg. So they had to beat it back out. And hence we have the Ratlines, okay? And they became dragon returnees, and including Klaus Barbie and Otto Skorzeny, who finally organized Odessa over in Latin America, but that's another story. But Barbie was and Skorzeny were brought to the CIC, Counterintelligence Corps, U.S. Army, 97th Unit that vetted the dragon returnees coming out of Russia. And my big, suspect that I wanted to get hold of was the head of the Waffen Pruf 9, who was engaged in writing these Fiat reports, for the Allied forces. Walter Hirsch, and Klaus Barbie's men beat him to death. He only finished 3 of 9 chapters of the famous Hirsch report, on the history of Russian chemical and biological warfare. And so, voila, that's when I first encountered records of Klaus Barbie. So I hadn't been foiling them, but at the other hand, the FBI sent me more papers on Klaus Barbie that when he was being tracked by a San Francisco supervisor, that the Russian conservative news, white Russian newspaper in San Francisco had published, and those files were lost. After so that people were tracking Klaus Barbie, but he's working for the CIA at that point afterwards. But those files were that were in the Russian newspapers also vanished. So, but that's the first wind I heard about this guy, and I had no idea anything. I mean, I was ignorant of history. My background is sculpture. I cast in bronze, My passion is classical music, and that was my entire life. Having to get educated with history was a crash course, So I had a lot of reading to do, and I'm a very slow but thorough reader. And I wrote hundreds of Freedom of Information requests, and I drove the government nuts. And my answer is tit for tat. If you can drive me nuts, I can drive you nuts, That was about it, And
they are.
No sympathy whatsoever. And they pick up the phone. Oh, it's Miss Verdon again. Well, honey, you are a government employee. You work for me. So, I mean, I just call this death by bureaucrat. 22 million federal employees for 330 million citizens. That's a ratio of 1 to 15 bureaucrat, unelected. That's regulating our lives. I just have had enough. Well, in the meantime, while I was writing these FOIAs to the FBI, William Webster had appointed, remember, he's Carter's FBI director, and he's overseeing the new OSI, Office of Special Investigations, Criminal Division, tracking Nazi war criminals. He promotes Robert Hansen, Hot Fingers Hansen, to the Russian Commerce Desk, counter-espionage, for Amtorg under Operation Pocket Watch. So everything that I'm FOIAing on Amtorg to the FBI starts first being promised to me, and then it vanishes. You know, they ask for the check, the money, they'll send me this, and oh, they can't locate the files.
Yes.
So, you know, and I was being stonewalled year after year. So I finally went to my congressman. Well, by 19, let me see. Let's see, 1921, February 17th, just after Baby Bush was inaugurated, you know, George W. Bush.
Not 1921.
Oh, I mean, no, 2021. I'm sorry. Yes, okay, just 100 years difference. Okay. But
So that's 2001.
2001, Baby Bush is inaugurated president. And he still has Clinton's FBI director, Willie Freya, okay, tracking Robert Hansen. But he doesn't arrest him under Clinton. I mean, Clinton pardons everybody, right? He doesn't arrest him until Baby Shrubby becomes president. And I adore Baby Shrubby, okay? And he becomes president, and just about 3 weeks after he's inaugurated, Willie Freya captures Robert Hansen at a drop site with the goods. I mean, he takes everything. He doesn't photocopy things. He takes 60,000 original documents out of the FBI and hands them over to the Russians. Whether in the beginning, whether it's the Soviet Union, and after 1989, when it's the new Russian Federation, he's still feeding Moscow. And so he gets arrested. And I'm going, oh my God, now, where does that put me? And so I had to update my book the first time. And I put out a paperback, okay? And then, as time went on, I had to update it a second time. And so, and then here it is the third time in 2021. I updated it the third time, where I finally got hold of the blow-up files of the Karl Hoecker Album of Auschwitz that had been donated by an anonymous CIC agent to USHM, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And finally, those photographs, which apparently have the negatives, were put on Wikipedia. And I could blow them up. And
Yeah.
I could match the photographs of the real Josef Mengele with all of his cohorts at Auschwitz, and the scars on his face and his ears to the photographs. Yeah. Okay.
That's part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And of the photographs of the Tolkmouth dossier, ID card, where it had been forged, obviously, by Josef Mengele. I had the proof, finally. And this was in 2019 when I blew up these photographs. And I just said, oh my God, after all of these years, here it is. And I never would have even looked it up on the internet, except for the fact a friend of mine from the Lyme Disease Association had emailed me and then mailed me a book by a young woman named Chris Newby. And she said, look at this, Rach.
And Hoecker was the adjutant to the commandant at Auschwitz, so they all tie together, just throwing it out there.
Oh, yes, and there he is. And there's, let's see, there's...
Mengele is there.
Mengele's there, Bayer's there, Hess is there. I don't know who the other guy is there, but there's a whole bunch of them. But there's other side views of Mengele. He's
Yes.
sort of the short one, okay, on the left side. There are other side views of him that I've supplied in my book, where he is obviously the same man. There he is. Okay, when you blow that picture way up, you will see a rectangular corner tear above his temple. Okay, and they're on both pictures of this Mengele and on the Tolkmith ID card, the dossier, which is forged. And I thought, wow, hot dog. And it's the same ear, okay? I mean, you compare the ears, theoretically. Nobody cares about scoffers, but the ears match up. And I thought, this is it. Okay. But then, how long? Okay. This guy, this ID card shows that Mengele, a.k.a. Tolkmith, with his forged, dossier card, he comes into the United States in 1950. He crosses the Canadian border and comes through Niagara Falls. Okay. Now, why would he have to do that? A mild-mannered paperclip scientist doesn't need to do that. The Tolkmith originally came through New York City, and for an entire year he was escorted around Dow by Dow chemist Dr. Drake. And Drake reported every day to the U.S. Army as to what, Dr. Dow was, Dr. Tolkmith was doing. Well, he's got a paperclip file. But Mengele, a war criminal, he had to come in on a 100 Persons Act created by President Truman to allow in 100 Nazi war criminals with their dossiers scrubbed and all their crimes, war crimes, eliminated, any record of them. So it makes sense that Mengele would have come in 1950. That is the same year that the health department was engaged in making the biggest multiple sclerosis with its component co-infection of Lyme disease, the biggest survey of multiple sclerosis in U.S. history. It went on for 10 years. It was headed by the health department, or the public health service back then, and it involved Dr. Leo Alexander, a psychiatrist who was our consultant to the Nuremberg trials, medical trials of U.S. versus Karl Brandt. Okay, now, and he's the author of the Nuremberg Code on, how do you treat prisoners of war. He's a famous doctor. So he's in charge with the health department and the National MS Society and bringing in consultants, German Nazi consultants that were not tried at Nuremberg, like Walter Schreiber, not Schreiber, George Schaltenbrand, who's an MS expert. He writes a book called Die Multiple Sclerose Dimension, and he writes a 2-volume FIAT report, a Field Information Agency technical report for the Allied forces on virology. It's 2 volumes, okay? And it's all in German, but if you start looking up spirochetes and multiple sclerosis, you find out that he's well briefed on the role of Lyme disease as part of the allergy complex of MS. And he's not the only one who wrote about this. There's a whole slew of doctors. Oscar Vott from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Brain Research was transferred from Germany to the KWI Institute for Brain Research in Moscow. Okay? And he was replaced by Dr. Spatz, Hugo Spatz, I think it is. So, there were reports written by Alzheimer's, there were reports written by Frederick Wertham, by Franz Janel, by Ernest Rudin, and Oscar Vott and Spatz, and I mean, the whole 9 yards of multiple sclerosis being caused by spirochetes, silver cells in the brain. This is nothing new, and yet our health department doesn't want to come out and mention this, if there's any tie. So why? And I'm just going to throw out a hypothesis here. Back in 1935, President Roosevelt, former governor of New York, had hired Surgeon General Thomas Perez, Thomas Paran. I call him Parana, both in New York when he was governor, and then in the Public Health Service, which he created in 1935, and he was tracking syphilis, which is a spirochete, but easily tracking Lyme disease with it, And he started a secret guinea pig experiment on a group of black sharecroppers in Tuskegee, Alabama. That experiment wasn't exposed until 1969, when the first exposure of Lyme disease was recognized. It's just too coincidental. Now, was Mengele advising the Tuskegee syphilis experiments with Lyme disease? Who knows? Was he with the Public Health Service with Alexander or George Schaltenbrand, the National MS Society? Byron Waxman headed that. His lab was at Woods Hole, and he was studying fish toxins there. Is that part of MS? Who knows? And his father, the famed Selman Waxman, had an institute at Rutgers University. He could have gone there, changed his name and identity and everything and become a new person, and could have researched there. But I corresponded and talked on the phone with Byron Waxman. And he said he had German scientists with him, but we didn't, and he even talked to me about their names. None of those people I'd ever heard of, And so I wrote him off, And I began to think, once I learned about this Tuskegee experiment, and there was a very strange coincidence. I became a pilot, got my license in about 1970, and I was flying out of first Brainerd Field and then Bradley Field in Connecticut, which is an international airport, and it had a control tower. So I thought I'd better go up there and learn. So I had to take physical exams, FAA physical exams. Mm-hmm. My doctor was black. He was Vincent Marchbanks, who was the red tail surgeon for the red tail pilots from Tuskegee.
Oh, well, I bet he had a story to tell.
Oh, yes. And he was like, he was a stuffed shirt. He was like listening to my grandfather asking me, now, are you behaving? And I'm there, well, of course I'm behaving, Well, I was a hippie. I mean, what could he, what could he say? Okay. No. And but anyway, so he was my doctor, my physician for my FAA exams. So you talk about strange coincidences. I sort of began to consider there was a very good possibility that Mengele was working with the health department, with these Tuskegee Lyme disease, experiments that were eventually exposed in 1969, which would have meant that Mengele was still here somewhere doing something. Well, in the meantime, the Red Cross makes a passport for um, Karl Mengele as Joseph. And off he goes to Argentina. And everybody says, oh, Josef Mengele, and he's part of Odessa and blah, blah, blah. I don't think so. I looked at both the discrepancies and the Tolkmith dossier of the differences in their physical appearances. You've got Tolkmith, the oldest, born in 1910. You have Mengele's real birthday was 1911, but the forged forged Tolkmith photographs, ID card, show 1912, and which is Karl Mengele's birthday. It gets real fuzzy. I mean, you've got 3 different Josef Mengeles and 3 different birth dates. You don't know if he died at Beketovka, Tolkmith, or died at Midland, Michigan with Dow Chemical. You've got Mengele at Beketovka. You've got Mengele, possibly at Dow, and you've got Mengele, his body being dug up in Sao Paulo, Brazil, or who knows where this guy is, buried. But the physical discrepancies between the Tolkmith dossier photo ID card and the Tolkmith dossier physical descriptions of Tolkmith just don't add up. I mean, one guy is 2 inches taller and fatter and heavier. I mean, you've got light complexion, dark complexion, with scars, without scars, different birth dates, and you go, yeah, they're similar but not quite. One has gray eyes, the other one has gray-brown eyes, and it's it. So it's just it's hocus pocus, switched at birth, switched at death. Then came the Justice Department's report in the matter of Josef Mengele, when they dig up the body in Sao Paulo. And he died something like 10 years previously. Okay. And they do a DNA test on the body. And they say, well, it's 99% sure that it's Josef Mengele, a Mengele. I'm going, oh, really? Let's
so a Mengele.
Yeah. There are 6 billion people on Earth. Okay, 99%, the 1% missing is 60 million people as potential substitutes, other Mengeles. Or I mean, this is hocus pocus with math. If you can't do the math, you don't know who's cheating you. So, I mean, I became suspicious of these DNA tests. But then you look at the in the matter report of Josef Mengele. Okay, the body.
Yes.
The osteoporosis on the femur migrates up to the hip. The skull has a smaller diameter. The teeth have migrated in the jaw. Who ever heard of migrating teeth? And and it just went on and on. And I said to myself, this isn't right. This is fudge. This is forged. You can't make me believe this BS. Excuse me.
Besides, back then, if you do the DNA of 3 different brothers, you'll come up with a roughly similar result.
Especially after the body's been in the grave for 10 years and decomposed. And this was back, in the 80s, okay, which it wasn't as.
92, they did a DNA on Mengele's body, and that's interesting because a lot of very interesting thing happened in the beginning of the 90s. Borman's body also magically appeared in the early 90s and was DNA tested, well, halfway, in a way that it certainly wouldn't be able to be matched up with any possible children he may have had after the war. And Mengele's body is sitting in the Institute of San Paulo's Forensic Medicine. It's not even buried, at least the one that claimed to be him, and the family won't bring it back to Germany for more testing. So all these old Germans that seem to die in all these different places and get buried in all these strange DNA tests that are incomplete. It's amazing. It's not just 1 or 2 or 3. They all just seem to change the DNA and cover themselves in red clay and show up in strange places.
Yes. Well, it's a farce, okay?
It is.
So much. But if you were in the health department, which usurps half the budget in the United States, pushing for socialized medicine, you certainly don't want to expose the fact you've got Nazis on the payroll, okay? So when
they retired, they were retired in South America. Makes perfect sense.
Well, of course. Well, so maybe Josef Mengele did eventually go back to South America. He could have.
I mean, when they were done with Barbie, they shipped him there and then shipped him back to France when he was no more of service. Because Barbie worked for the agency for decades.
Well, and he double-crossed everybody. Everyone that he did business with, selling arms, selling drugs, arming the Contras, blah, 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 arming the Algerians, arming the Tunisians. Even a Jewish ship pulled up in the middle of the night, according to Alan Ryan, who became the OSI chief after, and forced Barbie to unload all the weapons to the Israeli ship. I mean, but he double-crossed everybody, and he took the money. And
so that's why the CIA actually gave him up, because he double-crossed them. He was playing his own cards.
Oh, he worked for the Russians. Remember, he and Otto Skorzeny came out of Russia as a POW in the Russians' Operation Theo, Theo, and he was brought to the CIC 97th Unit under Operation Happiness. Now, this is declassified in the IWG files, working group agency under Clinton. Millions of pages, okay? And I had a nice young lady retrieve some of this stuff out of the National Archives for me, because I don't travel too well anymore. I'm technically cleared of Lyme, but I've got allergies up to the gazebo, okay? I don't make a good dinner guest, okay? So, it's a big deal for me to move, okay? So, but I move when I have to move, okay? And I certainly couldn't afford the cost of living in San Francisco. I mean,
who can?
Yeah, well, I moved to Utah, and from there, I moved back to California, and from there, I moved to Oregon, and then I'm, moving again. So I'm like all over the place, okay? I lived all over the West Coast, and it's been a nightmare. It really has. And every time I move, I have to lose. I had 5 file cabinets of declassified documents. Yeah, now I'd say maybe 2. I don't know, less. Okay. I still hang on to something.
Well, you should. And so we get to when did Plum Island become the animal disease testing grounds in relation to when all these guys came over here? Because it
Well,
must have played a part.
it's about 1950. In fact, even Osama bin Laden was interested in Plum Island, which was ridiculous because he was listening to all the garbage and gossip and conspiracy theories. Okay, there was nothing there of interest. But 1950, it changed from the U.S. Army bombing test site, off the tip of Manhattan. I mean, it's just way out there. And they gave it to the Department of Agriculture, which decided they would build a laboratory there. And all of the conspiracy theories after building that lab. Well, the director, Roger Breeze, I talked to him on the phone. He wrote letters to me, and he specifically said, "This is crazy. We've never done any research on any spirochetes." The ones that did the research were the U.S. Army, okay?
Uh-huh.
And the U.S. Army made its first report on, oh dear, let me just see if I can pull the title of this thing up here. I've got it marked somewhere.
Well, you look at it, it is interesting that the military would give up a proving ground for an animal disease center, knowing how unwilling they are to give up proving grounds for any reason.
Let me just see. Oh boy, here. I tried to mark this thing in here. Let's see.
Oh, did Jim Morris talk about Plum Island too?
Oh, yeah. Well, let me just see. Here.
I'll
Let's
let you.
see.
But
Abstract. Blah.
it's not like any military really ever want to give up their proving grounds for anybody to walk or visit or see.
No, of course not. So,
which is a really good place to do things, because most sane people, myself excluded, won't go traipsing around a place full of unexploded munition. Since I'm clearly an idiot, I have no problem doing that. But most normal people wouldn't do that. So it's a great place to hide things and do things.
anyways, okay, I give this up. I've marked it too many times, but maybe I can. Anyways, there was a great big Defense Department report made in 1977 by, and you can look this up, okay, Christopher Dodd of Connecticut, okay, Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts, and Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah and the Dugway Proving Grounds. So all three of these guys had interest, okay? And these hearings forced the Department of Defense to write this monstrous report of its entire history of biological warfare and using human subjects. There was nothing in there on Plum Island. Nothing. In fact, what they discovered, people were yelling, "Oh, the birds are the vector." What they discovered was that the birds they tested out in the Aleutian Islands up in Alaska. Excuse me. Pardon me.
Yeah, perhaps. And and this, and we're also looking at the 50s and 60s as a time where various agencies and the military and the CIA was testing LSD on its soldiers and civilians, and the spread of diseases over San Francisco they sprayed. So it's certainly not that any of these agencies had any qualms about doing things that might be considered just ever so slightly unethical. Back to the birds.
But it turned out that spirochetes, I think they used Newcastle disease of chickens, but the spirochetes were not transmitted to other birds or any other animals. Um, it, this was very significant. It proved that the birds were not the vectors. So, and further research on the deer by both the Merck pharmaceutical company and by the Russians with, let's see, Ian Pavlovsky, who was head of the Red Army biological warfare, proved that the deer actually immunize the sick ticks and stop the epidemic. Okay, because the deer, and for people that are still sick with Lyme, listen up, the deer eat the tips off the pine trees, which are, tannin bombs, tannin, tannic acid. Okay, and tannic acid penetrates the brain where antibiotics are kept out by the brain sheath. So if you have this spirochete in your brain and your spinal cord, you want to either eat pine trees, okay, or I made tea out of hemlock when I lived years ago up north. And oh man, that just made me feel terrific. Don't confuse it with the hemlock bush, okay? That's different.
So what you're saying is a lot of times nature has within itself the what we need to cure various diseases from plants and things.
In the wild,
You say that.
But the deer are not domesticated, but the rats are domesticated, and they have terrible immune systems, and they pick up everything and transmit everything. So if you're looking for vectors of Lyme disease, focus on the mice and the rats, and stop this nonsense about Plum Island. Okay, there are some islands up in Massachusetts that are overwhelmed with Lyme disease, like Nantucket, where they actually had a woolen textile mill there. And poor President Obama is living in his mansion, his castle, on what is it? Martha's Vineyard, yeah. Right. And I swear the U.S. Army built a mined moat around Martha's Vineyard just to protect Obama. Okay, really, I mean, they must have mined the moat. That's all I can say. But I feel sorry for them. He's in a luxurious prison, the same way. What was it? Prince Edward and Wally Simpson were kept on the island of what is it, Jamaica or Bermuda? I think which one is owned by
one of the French Isles?
Well, it was owned by the British, so it's probably Jamaica. Okay.
Yes.
Or Bermuda. No, I don't think it was Bermuda. One or the other. Anyways, during World War II, because I would consider it a national security threat, Hitler absolutely adored Wally Simpson. I mean, he was like sort of in love with her. But of course, she was married, to Edward, who abdicated the throne. But he was a national security threat, so they put him on an island. Now,
he very much was, and I know from somebody who read the paperwork, from his bodyguard, actually had a clear directive that if the Germans should invade Britain, he was to kill him. So he wouldn't, in case the British took over the British island, then they wouldn't be able to install him as a Nazi-friendly king. And you're not going to find that being pulled out of the Secrets Act anytime soon. But it was a brief minute. Now we're back to the Hess mess and all the things nobody wants to talk about after the war, because it doesn't make a whole lot of people look good.
So,
but yes.
Yeah, okay. So much for the conspiracy theories.
Yes, no.
What I don't know what to tell you. So this is this mystery of who was Henry Tolkien and who was Josef Mengele and where they went needs to be clarified. And to ask the Russians to look in their files on Beketovka as to what happened there, and if Tolkien was there, or Mengele was there, and von Bach was there, what happened? They could share with us, and they might really help us. But then, who in Russia wants to admit that, oh yeah, we had Nazis working for us? No, they don't want to admit to that. Now, you have Dow Chemical, and they probably have pictures, and they know that their man Tolkien is not Mengele. They probably know it, but they can't say it. They can't talk about their personnel. I wrote a letter to them, and they said, "Oh dear, Miss Verdon, we're so sorry we can't help you, but we can't discuss our personnel with you, with anybody. It's against company policy." And I said, "Well, thank you, ta-ta." It's like, but I realized, but it makes sense. So there is something really fishy going on here. And I would like some answers, because I'll be damned if I am handing over my body to the health department, okay, for any kind of a cure. They have never cured anybody of a cure since 1935. No cure for anything with this giant medical gravy train has cured anybody of anything. And
we're into treatment. We're not into cures. Treatment makes money.
I would prefer to pay somebody, probably, who profits from curing me than somebody who profits from killing me. I mean, just give grandmother the pain pill does not cut the mustard. I'm sorry. But this is where government, I think, becomes too big. And the health department, which usurps half the budget of the United States, should be privatized and consulted on an as-needed basis. Congressmen are not doctors, courts are not doctors, judges are not doctors, and they don't know everything. They created this, the Chevron deferral case, I think it was back in the 70s, that transferred the court's responsibilities in deciding criminal cases and Congress's civil responsibility for writing legislation to the bureaucrats in the deep state, in the different agencies within the government. So we are literally being ruled by bureaucrats.
Oh, yeah, that is how you subdue. Yeah. But it's very interesting what you brought up about Tolkien ended up in a private industry, because that is exactly what they did with the rocket scientists. That is most likely what happened to General Kammler. That is what happened to all of these guys, and it's what happened to both American research and German research that was brought here after the war. We confiscated 30 tons of document from the German patent office, and all of it was not investigated and researched by the government, by the army. It was given to private companies to research on their own, Lockheed Martin or Dow Chemical or whoever, that they benefited and took these people and took this research because You cannot FOIA a private company about anything. That is their private, and that is the arm's length distance all the intelligence, the military is having from all these special projects or secret projects and the strange things that rise around. They have plausible deniability, and they have no FOIA rights. And that's how you get away with hiding anybody from anybody. I mean, I had Nazi war criminals, so I was living not far from here. Again, working for private business, started their own. And it's you literally have to find somebody you can give enough beers, who's old enough to remember and still remember. You remember this dude in your office. Because the companies, what are you going to go to Lockheed Martin and say, by the way, all this German tech that you built, where is it? What is it? Oh, you don't want to tell me. Gee, shocking. And that is exactly how you do it. And this is the integration between state and big business and bureaucracy. No one can give you a clear answer. No one can tell you anything. And FOIA requests are only good as far as they can find it. They worded it correctly, which they you never do. They always find it. I have the aide to Eisenhower, to FDR. I'm sorry, who dealt with General Kamla. He was in the American military for decades. He worked in all the special projects. You see him behind both presidents, talking to them. And he was the one that traveled around Germany. He did a lot of things. He was involved in the Manhattan Project. He was absolutely a known entity. But when you FOIA him, the only thing I found was the invitation to his retirement party. And when I looked that up again to download it a couple of months later, even that was gone. And we know he worked for the military and the government for decades. And that's one thing I'll say about your book is it is so full of information and references to files and documents. You really did a lot of digging, getting all of this.
I was obsessed. I really was. I for over a decade. But there's something we need to understand here about Kamler. Okay, I mean, he's a prize man.
Oh yes.
He must have realized his own country was leaking like a sieve.
Yes.
You hire all these businesses that are capitalist, yes. And what do you expect? Okay, so even though they had Nazis on their board, Germany leaked like a sieve, and not only that, but Russia leaked like a sieve. And the United
Look in our country today and the research we're doing, setting up labs in foreign countries that are technically our enemies. Hello. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. But let's go back to World War II and the OSRD, the Office of Scientific Research and Development under the Department of Commerce. Okay. The OSRD was created in 1941 by executive order of Roosevelt, okay? And he gave them carte blanche to spend as much money as necessary to develop weapons and research weapons. The OSRD, Office of Scientific Research and Development, was eventually headed by Henry Wallace, the former vice president with Roosevelt, who was dumped, and he became president of the Department of Commerce, or director of the Department of Commerce. And he hired Vannevar Bush, no relation to the Bush current family, okay? Vannevar Bush as director of the OSRD. So you've got communists who are, and we remember we're allied with the Soviet Union that are running the OSRD. And of course, there are many starving young students that are spying for Amtor Trading Company. And whatever goes to Amtor, because of the circular route, of commerce between Moscow, Westtorg, Arcos, and New York, Amtorg, goes straight to Berlin.
Yeah.
Because of Westtorg. Amtorg to Westtorg, and so I found correspondence on Amtorg's files where the Hamburg shipping lines were spying for Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, and in turn, J. Edgar Hoover was spying for British intelligence, not American intelligence. So, I mean, this is a maze of espionage that
Yes.
I cannot sort out. Now, you are in the know far more of history than somebody that's a sculptor. Okay, I have to declare my ignorance at some point.
I think when it comes to the entanglements of government's intelligence and offices, we all are, because it is an impenetrable. It is built to not be able to see, to not be seen through. That's why the whole system is constructed the way it is, and why no one can take responsibility for anything, because no one is really in the know, and the ones who are not going to talk to any of us. So
but the Soviet Union and the Germans, Hitler, got it right. They have military intelligence and they have civilian intelligence.
yes,
We have 17 agencies of intelligence officers. That's,
you're in the 50s now.
Robert Oppenheimer made a very famous quote: "The house of science has no doors." I mean, that's the understatement, okay?
Yes, ever so slightly.
They tried to pin on him the guilty, possibility that he was the supplier of the atomic bomb secrets to Russia, to the Soviet Union. And of course, from your research of the atomic weapon research with the post office in Germany, they certainly had greater opportunity to get those secrets from the people. Who were some of those people that?
Well, that's another interesting thing when you look at the science connection, because the scientists continued their communications throughout their own channels. Like when Niels Bohr in Denmark was sort of a neutral go-between, where German scientists would go and talk to him about their research, and then he would talk to the Allies in America about their research. And it was, speaking of leaking like a sieve. I got an interesting question I want to run by you. Across all of this paperwork, did you ever come across any of the Japanese scientists from Unit 713, from their chemical or medical research teams? Did any of them come over here and join forces? I mean, we know the head of the unit ended up running an American pharmaceutical company, so yes, they did. But are they anywhere to be seen in any of the papers you come across?
Well, yes, I did. Because the Korean War in 1950 and 51, which involved China, also involved the history of Germany. And it's we have to go back again to, you're not going to believe this, but anyways, there was a Russian named Anatoly Vonsiatsky, okay, a Russian fascist who beat it out of Russia and made it to Germany and then made it to America. And he married Miriam Ream, whose family is tied to the Hearst media empire, okay? So he comes to the United States, as the fascist, the Vahad, okay? And he moves to Connecticut in Putnam, upstate eastern side.
Connecticut again.
And he builds a golf course called the Nine Holes. He sets loose turtles all over his property with swastikas, backward swastikas, the sign of the Russian Fascist Party. Okay, he sets them loose, and the people are terrified. You know, these turtles with swastikas, backward swastikas, are running all over the place. So he has a partner that Razdensvinsky. Okay, Razdensvinsky, got that? Okay, his partner is in Harbin, China, where all these white Russian refugees are flooding in during, the Bolshevik Revolution. And he's engaged with the Japanese that are tied into doing biological warfare on the Chinese. Okay, so these. He eventually dies, but I believe his son it comes over again with paperclip. And you have to remember that paperclip took in communists as well as Nazis.
Of course.
Okay? Yeah, from Germany and from the Korean War. So the son comes over, I believe, possibly, I can't prove this, but to teach in Connecticut. We'll just leave it at that, because this is very fuzzy and speculation. Okay. But the problem is that you have diseases running rampant in China, Manchuria, and Korea, and there's you've got the Russian fascists there, and you've also got a biological warfare center in Pyongyang, which has been dispersing the plague, the bubonic plague, and other diseases. And some of this is written up in the biography of MacArthur by his intelligence officer, Willoughby, about the biological warfare going on in China. And and he documents some of this. But the OACSI files that I had declassified had some on Korea, and it turned up this Pyongyang BW Center as well. So, and of course, during the Korean War, the Chinese and the North Koreans, Kim Il-sung, fingered the U.S. Army Air Force for doing biological warfare and dropping these sick bugs all over the snow. Well, ding dong, it happened to be the Pyongyang BW Center that was setting this stuff loose. So the North Koreans don't want to admit the truth. The Chinese don't want to admit the truth up there in Manchuria and Harbin, and it's a very bizarre thing. And of course, North Korea is just south of the Soviet Union's fur shipping port, Vladivostok, at the end of the Siberian Railway. So all those warehouses are chock full of all these, what I would say, infested furs, and rats going everywhere. So you tell me who's responsible for what. Now, the Defense Department and George Merck, who was in charge of our defensive program of biological warfare, testified before the United Nations and everybody else that this was not the U.S. Air Force's, doing. and that the prisoners of war that the North Koreans tortured into forced confessions um, were innocent, and they were forced to make false testimony. So it has been a long time, going back to the Crimean War, the American Civil War, with Karl Marx and his patron, a textile magnate in London, Frederick Engels. And he was doing business with the Confederacy and the slave laborers picking cotton. And the whole racism and allegiance with the South. There's 70 volumes of Karl Marx, inciting to riot with bank robberies, and, devaluing the currency and stealing all the gold, et cetera, et cetera. It goes way back to Florence Nightingale getting sick with brucellosis in the Crimean War, with the Russians and the Turks and the British and French coming in. Yeah. She was sick with brucellosis, which was coming out of Malta, and that's, I guess the Turks were there, and, Maltese Falcon, okay, was the old name for brucellosis is Malta fever. Malta fever, Bang's disease, and bovine spontaneous abortion disease, which that just destroys the babies or the calves in the womb. It makes a premature birth.
So the enemy would infect the cattle to not actually give viable birth and deny the food chain down the line.
And the dung would have been full of brucellosis. And of course, this stuff was running rampant in Russia. The Kyle's reports, the OACSI files, the BIOS reports, the JIOA, Joint Intelligence Operation Committee, and the Authority, and what else is the Field Information Agency technical reports. They were all detailing these horrific pandemics of brucellosis, including the ex-KGB guy, Viktor Suvorov, who wrote Icebreaker. He talks about the Russian army right up there on the border with tanks that could drop tractor tires, it pull up its tractor treads and drop down truck tires and race across real roads 70 miles an hour. They brought with them all their livestock right up to the border of Germany, and with it their manure. If you want to spread brucellosis, that's the way to do it. And Germany was absolutely inundated with this stuff. Some of these reports that were made by the U.S. Army Medical Corps had veterinarians that went into the smaller towns, and I guess you would call them counties, and they had to destroy. They trained thousands of German veterinarians to learn this, how to destroy and detect and destroy the brucellosis and Q fever, whatever, and typhus infected livestock, and pasteurize the milk. 1/3 of the meat was infected. 1/3 or more, at least half of the milk, was unpasteurized. The people were nuts. The army was nuts. And who would have known all about this problem with agriculture and, meadow muffin, shall we call it, poop, bovine poop? Would have been Hitler. That was his
of all people, yes.
Well, what did he do to help and heal his people and clean up the disease? Have you come across any information where he had the livestock slaughtered and the milk pasteurized and the fertilizer? My God, I mean, there must have been something the matter with the fertilizer that was being spread everywhere on those farms. I don't trust that guy. And I think Kammler was right not to eventually trust them in the end. And you said Himmler had made 3 approaches to kill Himmler. Himmler to kill Kammler.
Yeah. But it's interesting with Himmler because he had his PhD in agriculture and farming, and he always took an interest in how all that worked. So that, which is one of the reasons why the SS ended up being part of researching into biological everything from diseases to flying plants and seeds in from all over the world to try to figure out how to grow the best and fastest. And if you ever want to go to genetic manipulation of cattle, livestock, grains, plants, that's probably where you need to start looking at Himmler's initiatives.
Well, so and they went to the Amherst, right? To Tibet and South America.
Yeah.
And so this is and this was the expertise of Kurt Blome, who was also brought over under Project 1725, where he worked in Europe for the U.S. Army, and then as a cancer specialist and an aerial sprayer of pesticides. Okay. Yeah. And so he came secretly to the United States just for 6 months with this Project 63, where I think the same place Dr. Frank Olson was researching LSD. This is after the war, 1951, 52. And of course, Olson was murdered. He was thrown out of the Statler Hilton 10th floor by the mafia, Santos Trafficante, and who was working for the CIA, okay? Yes. And his men. And so Kurt Blome was over here, I think at the same facility with Gottlieb, studying, this. And the problem was Olson was an LSD expert for interrogation and using it as a antibiotic, a stronger antibiotic. And he had made somehow some kind of a slip of tongue where he mentioned the ergot crop dusting or possibly infestation in the farm town of Pont-Saint-Esprit in France. Ooh. And the whole town went nuts with ergot. Okay, so and the Russians had been using ergot as a disinfectant all the way back in 1925 at the American Amtor fur warehouses. And that's when the first director of Amtor was ordering in the pharmaceutical ergot and vast quantities, which triggered the secret agent in the Hamburg shipping lines to write the FBI. And this correspondence went on for years, and this very neat, precise, handwritten letters that were very lengthy and very detailed. And finally, the FBI, Hoover, got to the point where he hired, his secretary to transcribe these things into a typed message, okay? Because it went on for decades, absolute decades. So, I mean, this is this system of sickening the public and crippling them so that they can't resist a communist takeover has been going on, I think, since the Crimean War. And with this brucellosis business going to Malta fever, and from Malta going to Spain, and from Spain going to Mexico, and possibly even crossing through Texas during the Civil War, all the way up to Chicago, where the meat packing process companies were feeding the Union soldiers. There were copperheads up there. Who knows who burnt down Chicago, for what reason? But it's very interesting that during the Civil War, Columbus Delano was appointed as Secretary of the Interior, and he was also a sheep farmer, and he certainly would have been privy to any kind of a brucellosis infection with the American cattle, making it up to Chicago, crossing the border in Texas from Mexico. I mean, the French and the Spanish and the British were all down there in Mexico trying to stabilize the country, according to Karl Marx's articles in the New York Tribune. He was a military correspondent, a war correspondent. And of course, his mentor, Frederick Engels, the textile mill owner that was in cahoots with the Confederacy, was, subsidizing all this stuff. I'm suspicious about everything. I mean, I see communists, I said, under every other bed. And I could be wrong. And I've never fully researched it. There's 70 volumes of Karl Marx. But from the U.S. Army maps of the spread of brucellosis or the spread of multiple sclerosis in the 1930 military servicemen that went into World War II, that stretch was straight across the Canadian border from the Great Lakes to the St. Lawrence Seaway.
In an unbroken line?
And an unbroken line.
That's interesting.
Now, yeah, right. Okay. So, I mean, I wrote for maps from the Army. I got maps from the Department of Agriculture, and not only of, the plagues in the United States, but also from, the rest of the world, Germany, Europe, and Russia. And it's a very interesting thing. When the World Health Organization was made after, World War II, the first secretary of WHO was Fyodor Kratkov, who was the former director of Soviet socialized medicine, He became the first director of WHO. And suddenly, all the records of Stalin's plagues stopped. There was no more records of any plagues in the Soviet Union. It just stopped. With Fyodor Kratkov.
Hey, that's just interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, why? I mean, why did we build the UN in the first place? I mean, it's like...
Well, that is a different story. But let me ask you something about Lyme disease. Is it possible to weaponize it in a way where you are... Could it be sprayed? Could it be shared? Could it be aerosoled in a way? Or does it have to be break the skin like with a tick?
I think it needs the tick as the vector.
It needs to get in under the skin.
It's got to get under the skin. You've got to be injected with it. I mean, much has been postulated just about this, especially in Chris Newby's book, Bitten, where she smears Willie Bergdorfer and Alan Steer. she never even bothered to read all their medical journal reports. And she's blaming them for this cover-up. Well, you have to remember that Eisenhower put a flat-out ban on talking about any plagues. And Frank Olson went out the window. James Forrestal went out the window. Yeah, well, they tied a basketball cord around his neck and threw him out the window.
That was the Tests and Naval Center, yeah. Forrestal was a very interesting character. He also had stuff to say about high jump, didn't he? And Antarctica. And
oh, I haven't even followed that.
Oh,
but I think he was the cartoon character, and Al Capps, Little Abner. He was the cartoon character, Fearless Bostic. He looks just like Forrestal. So for James Floyd, he does. And he went. He was very ill, and he was furious with the CIA for not establishing an office, an OSI, an Office of Scientific Intelligence that would track these plagues. The CIA refused. So he went to the New York Times, and on the front page of the New York Times, he blasted. He says, biological warfare, we're protected and blah, blah, blah. And, we can save you, from plagues and this, that, and the other thing. And, a couple months later, out the window he goes, okay? So you've got that. You've got the murder of Frank Olson. And then there become other mysterious deaths. So it goes on and on. So you can't expect Willy Bergdorfer and Alan Steer to come forward and say, oh yes, this plague has been here since 1925. We've been tracking it, with the Public Health Department Service and Thomas Horan, with syphilis, and blah, blah, blah. And it's not a brand new disease, Well, they named it a brand new disease after old Lyme, Connecticut. And so everybody's going, oh, Plum Island, Plum Island. And I'm just saying, I've had enough of this. I don't like it when people lie to me.
No, it becomes we're getting quite used to it, though.
Well, I suppose so, the way it is today.
Tell me, do you have a website where you are slowly uploading all of the files and the documents that you have gotten?
No. Maybe it would be very practical.
Now you know what to do for the next 20 years.
Yeah, if I live that long. I'm 75 right now, so...
Oh, you'll be fine as long as you don't get... Oh, can't say that, then we'll get in trouble. But know what I'm thinking. I would suggest that they stop flying over my house for a minute. They're here. It's a postcard. Never mind. I think we should do another chat, and I think you should pull up some of these documents. I mean, you take your time. The world won't end until I think next year. Not 3 o'clock. And we'll scan. We'll take some of these same documents, and we'll pull out the documents and talk about them. But I think it would be really interesting to show also the wording and say, well, let's talk about this and this and this. I think we should.
All right. Well, that's
giving you something to do, because I'm sure you have just as little to do as me.
No. I'm retired. Okay.
All right, get on with it then.
I don't have money, but I'm retired. I can't print $1 bills in my own basement, even though the Federal Reserve can. I would go to prison for counterfeiting. So don't push those political buttons. But I'm retired. Okay.
But we can talk about that after. But I think it will be interesting if you picked out 10, 20, 30 documents. And if you don't have a scanner, you can always do a photocopy, send them to me. I'll scan them, and then we can talk about them one by one and what they mean. I'd like to sort of bring people in on exactly what was worded, and of course they can also just buy your book, but but it's more besides buying your book, which is on Amazon, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yes. Then we can just bring out the specific documents with timestamps and sort of follow the timeline. I think that would be interesting. You're all supposed to go in the chat now and say how much you agree with me on that idea.
Yes, I do agree, actually. There are new things unfolding every day. Right now, because of Chris Newby, she has forced the U.S. or the Defense Department to reinvestigate the origin of Lyme disease on Long Island and the involvement of a cover-up with poor Willie Bergdorfer. He spent hours on the phone to me explaining to me the history of Russian ticks and American ticks, and he's the tick expert, right? So trying to tutor me, and then poor Dr. Alan Steer, who's, if they would just read his reports, they would have all the answers there. So anyways, if you want to get lost, go to the old pre-1956 National Union catalog of the Library of Congress. It's huge. Take shelves, hundreds of volumes, shelves and shelves and shelves of these monstrous, huge volumes, okay? And they are full of material that went to the National Library of Medicine, Leo Alexander's reports, all these declassified documents. They're just full of information. The Tropical Disease Bulletin and the
interesting. It's interesting that there's an initiative from Congress actually investigating Lyme disease now. That we're asking for it. Maybe we should talk to them.
Yes.
Who pulled that up? Who asked for that?
Chris Newby and the LymeDisease.org organization backs her research. If these people would just please do their homework. I am not a genius. I am average. Average is a good place to be, okay? But here, I'll show you some right this very minute that I have on my desk. Okay, here we go. This is the Congressional Record, House of Representatives, the Chris Smith Amendment, okay, of bioweaponization of ticks passes the House. And it passed the Senate. And it's in the appropriations bill for the Defense Department to make this investigation. Okay, so here it is. This is a Washington, Thursday, July 11th, 2019. Okay, here we go. I'll try to hold it still. Let's see. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Oh.
That's the beginning. Next, here it is. Okay, here it is. The amendment to the Rules Committee print 116-19, offered by Mr. Smith of New Jersey. This is the congressman. About the bioweaponization of Lyme disease. Anyways, this here, let me see.
Okay.
Anyways.
And then people they can look these up because these are actually public.
Yes. These are off the internet. Okay.
They put all this stuff up public because they know they put up millions of papers and nobody can be bothered to read them. Not even the people actually voting on them can be bothered reading these things. But that's a whole different story, and we don't talk politics.
Well, these are short, sweet, and to the point. So it's really worth. Everybody who writes to your congressman is worth 10,000 voices. I'm suggesting rational people that can at least walk into a medical library at a university and look up the periodicals there. It's public record, okay? The Library of Congress is the biggest depository in the world of literature and documents. And the internet is only really a yellow pages for advertising. And to try to do research on the internet, which is unregulated for truth, is really not the brightest idea. It doesn't produce that much. You have to go and do the legwork and go to the archives and dig. And in some respects, you do have to be obsessed. I started in the San Francisco Public Library. And let me tell you, librarians are mysterious people, Tino.
I remember.
One of them pulled me aside and said, Rachel, the FBI has been here. Why do you're writing requests to get these public records declassified, and they want me to rat you out, What? But this government is covering its little behind
Yes.
with very large fig leaves, and I'll try to remain a lady, okay? But this just doesn't cut the mustard. And the interesting point is the research I've done, which it involves this IG Farben research from pesticides to poison gases. All those chemical formulas are literally. Let me just a minute. Get this here.
I'll look at the next chocolate coming over
here. Yeah. Okay. See this book? Oops, wait.
Yes.
Okay. This says Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, 10th edition. Okay. The formulas for all of these poison gases are in here. They're in encyclopedias. This is not classified anymore. Every terrorist, God willing, stopping them, has access to all of this knowledge. There is nothing top secret about it. It's here. It's been here for decades. I couldn't believe it myself. But it's all here. Oppenheimer was right. The House of Science has no doors.
That is very true.
They were terrified that he was going to expose what was going on. When I lived in California, I went over to Berkeley and went through their special archives and the Bancroft archives, which are special. They had files on the Alsace mission with Samuel Goudsmit and Boris Pasch and Oppenheimer. They tracked poor Oppenheimer night and day when they should have been tracking Boris Pasch and the Alsace mission.
They should.
Goudsmit. He was a card-carrying communist. In fact, the U.S. Army CIC tracked him until the day he died.
Pasch?
This stuff is in this Bancroft Library archives. There's public record.
That we have to talk more about, because Pasch is a lot more interesting than people give him credit for. And Pasch, for those who don't remember, was the guy that ran the Alsace teams that tried to track the German nuclear weapons research, the scientists, the whatever, or did a whole lot of other things. He ended up, as far as I remember, doing wet works for CIA and other things. We could get a whole program to.
Yes.
And
Well,
I think,
go on.
no, I was going to say, and I think we should, because we're on 2.5 hours almost, and I have to run out in the world. And I think we should do another chat in a month or two and go over the papers. And I think we need to bring Pash into this more, because I'm really curious about what you found.
Well, what does Alsace stand for?
Oh, Allied.
It is not an acronym.
It's not, is it?
It means grove, olive grove in Greek. Who is the head of the Manhattan Project? General Leslie Groves.
Oh. Oh, well, that all does actually make sense.
That was written on the license plate of every Alsace truck that went into Germany. Alsace. Right on the license plate.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. We know what we're going to be talking about next time.
Okay.
Gotta go to more work. But yeah, I would say I loved your book because there's so much information, so much references to it. So I really do think this is something we need to bring up the documents and talk about those. And we'll have a little bit more of a look about Pash and Alsace as well, because it's an interesting tie-in. It is like an octopus; everything ties into everything else. And on that note, I will see you in a month or so, but we'll chat on mail and figure out what we do.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it's nice to talk to somebody that knows what they're talking about, okay?
I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm just a damn good actor.
Oh, history-wise, really, you are way ahead of all of us. I have learned so much from your program. You will notice in my book that some of my information is obsolete, but I can't redo it again, okay?
No, we'll take the updates online and do them periodically here as you find more stuff. I think that's the way to go.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely updates will always come on, and we'll talk about it, and we'll share with everybody else.
That's a deal.
You have a wonderful Sunday, and that goes for all of you guys out there. And I will see you in a week, and I will see you here in a month or so. And you have a great Sunday up there. And
thank you so much.
Be well, be safe, and we're all going to die, but it's not going to be today.
Okay.
Damn.